Hello, my name is Myles McLeod and I am the author of Knight Sir Louis and the Dreadful Damsel from Guppy Books, which is by me and my brother Greg. I write the words, he draws the pictures, and we kind of came up with the idea together. If you're a writer and wanted some tips on writing middle grade fiction, I thought I could share with you the story of how I wrote. And if you're just looking for some good books to read, I thought I could also just share with you some of the books that helped me along the way. So first of all, you might be thinking, why should I be listening to Myles at all? Does he know what he's talking about? Well, here are some of the things I've done just so that you know a little bit about my background. So my brother and I call ourselves the Brothers McLeod. We have created lots of short films and started out just by, he was an animator, I was a writer, we came together and we made lots of silly animations. Eventually we got noticed by people like the BBC and then Aardman Animations, and we made some things for them, and we've kind of carried on doing that together for, ever since. And we've won a BAFTA and we've been nominated a couple of times for a film BAFTA. The other thing I've done is also work a lot with production companies for children's television. So I've written on people's shows, things you might know like Hey Dougie, Octonauts, Clangers. And the other thing I've done a lot of is develop shows for people. So, for example, Noddy, Toyland Detective, which is on Milkshake on Channel 5. I helped create some of the, not the visual design, but the characters, the personalities of some of the characters, like this little guy here. So I've got a lot of experience in TV and in short films, but I always wanted to write books. Now, it took me quite a long time to get from writing my first book to actually getting it published, because it wasn't really ready when I first wrote it. I'll probably do a few videos about different aspects of writing, but this one I just wanted to talk about one key thing that my agent Gaia said, which was, just go and read. You know, if you're a writer who doesn't read, there's something's wrong. You know, you need to be reading books, and not just books for your own pleasure, but actually, you know, if you want to write a book for a particular audience like middle grade readers, then you should be reading those books. And I wanted to share some of those that I'd read and talk about what I'd learned from each one. So first up, some of the influences for me and my brother when we were growing up include things like these, which I don't think are actually in print anymore, but by a comedian who was famous when we were growing up, called Eric Morecambe, and he wrote these two books about vampires. They were very funny and very silly, and we enjoyed them and reread them a lot of times. And the other thing which was a major influence on us growing up were the Asterix comics, which we absolutely loved, and we had most of them and reread them a lot, and a lot of them actually fell to pieces, so we had to buy new copies because we read them so much. Another big influence, of course, on our childhood, and who continues to be a big influence, is Roald Dahl. This is my copy of Fantastic Mr. Fox from when I was growing up. You can see it's got different illustrations to the one that you buy now. I really love these illustrations, actually. They're really beautiful. It's even got my name in the front from about 35 years ago. But now, of course, we think that everyone thinks of for this age group is Diary of a Wimpy Kid. And that was very interesting. I read it, and I read a few of them, and realised obviously that one of the main hooks for this kind of book is relatability. It's like this just relates to a lot of kids' lives. And actually Jeff Kinney, when he was interviewed, he said, you know, because he seems like quite a nice guy, and you kind of like, how's he written about this kind of this guy? And he just said he took all the worst things about himself growing up and put them into Greg, and that was how he created this character. And obviously it struck a chord with a lot of people because it's done so well. Because he's also great at cartoons, you know, there is a picture on every single page, and it's really easy to read. It's very visual, and you're gonna have to excuse my spectacles falling down today because it is really, really hot today, and these spectacles are very large and heavy. So I even bought it in Russian because I've been trying to learn Russian, but I haven't got very far. Some of the other books that I enjoyed when I was reading around were by a really lovely guy, Gary Northfield, and his Julius Zebra series. I really recommend this series. I haven't actually read the fourth one yet. I've read the first three, and they're just really funny. The characters are very flawed and very silly. He's got a group of friends, but also, he's very good at having, sometimes because he's a cartoonist and illustrator, sometimes the pages aren't words at all; they're just pictures. So in a sense, a bit like the way that Wimpy Kid works, but this is kind of more silly and more fun and more fantastical, which really appeals to me because I love those kind of really goonish characters. And the other thing that's really good about the way the illustrations are used in this book is that they don't just... you don't have words and then a picture says the same thing as the words. The pictures are actually used to tell a story. So you read some words, then you look at a picture, you understand something, you don't have to read about it, and then you read some more words. So it's all part of one story, and I thought that was really interesting, the way that Gary Northfield had done that. Then I also read some books by Joanna Nadin from slightly different age groups, but I actually really enjoyed both of these books. I thought they were fantastic. Joe All Alone you might know from the TV series. I've never actually watched it, but I'm not surprised it's been turned into a TV show because it's such a great book. And he's a really interesting character in a really interesting situation, and you just want to keep turning the page and finding out what happens next. So I think this was just a kind of compelling read because it's very... it's kind of an emotional read. There's a real emotional context to this book, whereas perhaps like Julius Zebra is more about fun and being silly, and Wimpy Kid is more about just a kind of everyday relatability. This is about an extraordinary event in this boy's life and how he copes with it emotionally. And Penny Dreadful, which is for a slightly younger audience, but I really enjoyed this just because she's such a flawed character. It's very easy to have a character in your book that's kind of bland or doesn't have a very strong character, but actually Penny Dreadful, magnet for disaster. She really is everything. She's quite well-meaning, but everything just goes crazily wrong, and so that's kind of fun because you really feel like you know that character. This was one I read a while ago, actually, before I started doing my research, or maybe at the beginning of the research, and this is called Madame Pamplemousse. I don't even think this is the first book in the series, but I read this book and really enjoyed it because, again, it had a fantastical element where they could time travel. And so it took quite an ordinary situation, but then just pushed it into some really exciting, fantastical realms. But I think the other thing I remember about this book was just the kind of sense of peril. So there was a real sense of danger for the characters, and which really pushed them forward and made the book exciting. So, and that's something else I think which made me think, you've got to make sure that the stakes are high for your characters in your book, because if the stakes aren't that high, then, who cares? Yeah, so Madame Pamplemousse, Peril. I think this might be one of the books, or certainly authors that was recommended by my agent to read, which is Lou Quenzler. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Nah, you got that wrong, mate. It's Lou Kunzler, innit? Tuh.
And this is Princess Disgrace. This is the first in the series. So I like this one because the main character, she's not from a kind of pretty part of the world. She's from a kind of tough kind of kingdom. So when she turns up, she has very different life experience to all the kind of what you might call typical expected princesses. And she's just got lots of guts and just lots of forward drive, and is a kind of a character you just really like because she just gets on with stuff, and she doesn't do what you expect her to do. She does what she wants to do. So I think that was another reason I really enjoyed this book, was again to do with the characters and the way the story unfolded in a way that you didn't expect, because I think it's very easy to fall into story patterns that you've read before or you've heard before. And I think as soon as you go, oh, hang on, am I doing what I expect I should be doing in this story? That probably means that the reader will have read it before and will start to know where you're going and maybe get bored. So that was a little tip I think I picked up from this book. this was a fun book too. Obviously, my book is about knights, and there are wizards and witches in it. So I did read a few books about witches. This one is Witch for a Week by Kay Umansky, which I really enjoyed as well. So this was more of a story about someone with what you might consider an ordinary life who's given an extraordinary opportunity, and she goes off and has to kind of figure out what she's doing as she goes, and you're not quite sure where it's going, and she's not quite sure if she's going to cope with it all, but she just kind of is thrown in at the deep end and has to cope with the situation she's in. Actually, more recently, after I've actually finished these books, I have been reading the Worst Witch books to my daughter, who is 6, next week. Now, I never read The Worst Witch when I was a child, but actually, I think what's interesting about The Worst Witch, because it is so popular and continues to be popular, and has been made into TV shows, I think more than once, is that it has a lot of the elements that I've talked about in a lot of these other books. It has peril, it has relatability because of the school situation, but it has something fantastical. The stories are quite unpredictable in terms of where they're going to go. So I think because it incorporates so many of those different things that we've noticed in the other books, I think that might explain why this book is a particular success, because it manages to do lots of different things in not many pages. Of course, there are quite a few sequels. We've now read 3 of them, and are going to read the 4th one pretty soon. So if you have any questions, just please ask in the comments below. And if you would like to pre-order a copy of Knights of Louis and the Dreadful Damsel, you can pre-order it from all the usual places at the moment. Please support your independent bookshop if you have one.